to Paradise Church. We're coming to you midweek, and we're just so thankful that you're here. We've had a number of challenges on Sunday morning for the last few weeks, and so we have chosen a couple of times to have to come to you midweek and just really sort of film and redo what we were trying to do on Sunday. So we thank you for your patience, but we are in the midst of an exciting week. We're looking forward to this Sunday. This Sunday is what we call Back to Church Sunday, and we do it every year, and we've been doing it for a number of years, but it seems like this week is going to be extremely special. This Sunday, we are trying to do two things. We're trying to have as many people as possible be with us in the sanctuary at 10 o'clock, but we're also trying to have as many people possible online, and so if we can hit sort of a high water mark for both of those, that would certainly be an exciting thing for us. We're also looking forward to, we are launching or relaunching our table service. We have a traditional service that takes place in the sanctuary, and that is always at 10 o'clock. And we also have a contemporary service. And for the summer and during this COVID season, we took a few weeks off, and we are bringing that service back. And that service is going to take place at 7 o'clock on Sunday evening. So you are welcome to join us at both of those times. If you want the traditional worship style, that of course will be at 10 o'clock. If you want the contemporary music worship style, that will be at 7 o'clock. But we're really excited because of our guest that's going to be joining us this coming Sunday. His name is Tim Yoder, and he is I don't know if famous is the right word, but he's well known in Louisville, in our town, in our city. And he is just a well-known guy. He's a great guy to begin with, but he just has an incredible story that he's going to be sharing with us. He battled COVID and was in the ICU for a number of weeks. And we're going to have him come and share his story with us. If you remember some of those early days when it was like March and April, when we were just sort of wrapping our minds around this pandemic, we were hearing a lot of stories of people who were in the ICU, people that were on breathing machines, people that were struggling in that way. And so Tim is one of those. He sort of fits that story and was really one of the first ones to go through that process. And so he's going to come. He's also going to bring what I'm really excited about. He's going to bring one of the ICU nurses with him that spent time ministering to him and obviously nursing him back to recovery. There was a number of times when they didn't think he was going to make it. And so she will be coming as well. And so I'll be able to sort of get the story from his perspective, but we'll also get some of that perspective from her as well. It's just an incredible faith journey story that we want to be able to share with you. So we're looking forward to this Sunday with great expectations. So we're obviously wanting to make sure you can join us either at 10 o'clock or 7 o'clock this coming Sunday.
Welcome to church. The church has always been defined as the people who comprise it. And never just a building for gatherings. The church has never been confined to four walls, because the heart of the church is to reach out to the community and serve. The church is people like you and me, connecting with each other through our faith and being there for each other when we need it most, like right now. In the first years of Christianity, nursing developed as an outreach of the church. This included risking their own health to care for the sick, feeding the hungry, caring for widows and orphans, and clothing the poor. Fast forward to COVID-19. The virus hit us all hard. The isolation was a new and difficult reality for us. We missed spending time in person with our friends and family. We worried about the pandemic spreading. We were forced to deal with the financial effects of shutting down. In the midst of the hopelessness and fear, the church stepped up once again. We delivered millions of pounds of food to families in need. We reached out to people online to spread the gospel's steadfast message of hope. We stayed connected to each other and our neighbors through whatever means we had to. We realized we need each other more than ever before, and we realized we'll get through this together. We learned that we are stronger together. Now, as things reopen and we can see each other in person, we have a renewed appreciation for moments spent with our loved ones and those in our community. And we, as the church, will continue to reach out to those in need. The world still faces as much trouble as ever, but no matter what happens, we're in this together, and we are stronger together.
Now, we've been in this series called Back to School. And over the last few weeks, we have looked at a couple of important stories that speak to us and to this idea of going back to school. And as we've said for each of these weeks, it is an important thing for us in terms of going back to school. We were sort of nervous as our kids were preparing to go back. We were certainly very excited for them to go back and finally get them out of the house. Those of us who have had kids, we've had kids every day since the middle of March, and it's sort of the longest summer break in the world. But at the same time, there was some nerves. There was some sort of anxiety as we weren't sure how this COVID-19 was going to affect the new school year, and and we're sort of adapting still to some of the changes. It feels good to be back, but there's enough changes where it still feels a little foreign to us. But what we've been doing through this series is, in the spirit of going back to school, we've been trying to go back to some basics, trying to talk through some basic ideas, some basic concepts in the scriptures that give us some clarity as we go back to school. And so we started this series with a story from 2 Kings chapter 22. We were looking at the story of Josiah. And Josiah takes the throne at a very young age and really does a lot to guide the nation of Israel back into sort of restoration and promise. And then the following week, we looked at the story of the young boy Samuel when he was hearing God call him for the very first time. His life had been committed to God, but he had finally started to actually hear the voice of God. And we went through that story of what to do when we think or when we know that God is calling us. And how do we first listen for that voice, but how do we also obey? Then the week after that, we went into the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. We were talking about the rebuilding of the temple and also the rebuilding of the wall that surrounds Jerusalem, and just how much focus Nehemiah had. And throughout all of the distractions that were sort of coming his way, he had this sort of just laser focus in terms of making sure that he did not give up on the things that he was called to do. That he was actually up on the wall saying, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. And it was our charge to sort of think about some of the things that we're facing and go from it in that perspective as well. And then we went into the first chapter of Acts, and we were looking at the story of Jesus after the resurrection and in right before his ascension. And he stays with the disciples for a few days, but eventually does leave the disciples, and he gives them some final words, a final charge, a final command for them to take this mission forward. And even at that time, we were sort of astounded that the disciples were still sort of clinging to an old idea. They were still clinging to what they thought the Messiah should do. And they really didn't sort of understand that God was in fact calling them into a new chapter to start a new thing. And so it's been an incredible series, and throughout the series, I have had fun doing it. We've had weeks where I have had costumes on and props and all of that. But as we close out this series, I wanted to make it very simple. I was thinking, there's not really a good way to go into character for this. But we want to sort of draw this series to a close with just a few very simple ideas. And while we've gone through these basics, one of the most important things that you can do when you start a new school year, or when you start a new job, or you're starting this new chapter, is the idea of remembering. When you go into a new school year, at least for the first couple of weeks, I remember when I was in middle school and high school, it was sort of the teacher's job to say, hey, do you remember where you were last year? Do you remember all the things that you learned last year? We're going to review very quickly. We're going to get you caught up so that you can start learning some new material. And in the scriptures, especially in the Old Testament, there is an overwhelming repetition of the idea of remembering, the idea of making sure that you do not forget. And it seems like every time that the followers, the Israelites, would go from chapter to chapter, from conquest to conquest, from place to place, there was always this call, there was always this charge. Don't forget where you just came from. Don't forget what God just did for you. Don't forget. And we look at the story, especially in the story of Moses, and we sort of dumbfounded. We think, how in the world could they forget all the things that they have seen? Especially when you look in the book of Exodus, when God calls Moses and he sends Moses into Egypt. And there's sort of this face-off between Moses and Pharaoh, or really between God and Pharaoh. And you go through the story of the plagues, and it ends up in an incredible story of Passover. And the Israelites are led out of Egypt, and they are led into the wilderness. And they begin their journey into the Promised Land. In fact, much of the first 5 books of the Bible cover and deal with this story. And when we get to the 5th book of the Bible, it's called Deuteronomy. And it's sort of repetitive. It's actually sort of a retelling of everything. Moses is taking an opportunity to recount or retell the story to the Israelites. And again, it seems kind of weird, like, well, wait, why do we have to have this story retold to us? Why do we have to have this repeated? We lived this. We already saw this. But it's really because of this main idea that Moses wants to make sure that they do not forget. The scene of Deuteronomy is very simple. Moses has brought the Israelites as far as he can take them. They are standing at the Jordan River. They are about to cross. And when you go into the next book, when you go into the book of Joshua, the Israelites cross that river and they start going through the process of claiming the land as their own. But in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses is sort of just saying, hey, before we go, I'm not going to be the one that takes you over there. I'm not the one that is going to take that step with you across the river. And I want to take some time to remind you of the things that we have learned together while we have been in the wilderness. And he wants to go through and sort of retell a lot of what we see in the book of Exodus and the book of Leviticus. He wants to retell sort of the basis behind the 10 Commandments, and just again to remind them. And again, like, why do we have to repeat this? Because we forget. Because we as people forget. It is said that our nation has about an 8-day memory. And whatever was big news just a few weeks ago seems to be something that sort of fleets over time. Now, I would say 2020 is a little bit different because we've sort of been in the same situation. But there is a reality that things that happened last year, things that happened in 2019, they seem like they're centuries away. And whenever we have sort of traumatic events, we look at events like September 11th of 2001, it's hard to believe that that was 19 years ago. Each of us have those events where we can sort of point back to and say, I remember when this event happened. I remember the day that the space shuttle exploded. I remember when JFK was shot. I remember these events, and again, they're sometimes it doesn't stay with us, and it doesn't have to be some big national thing, but for us, it's easy to forget. Like, how could we forget the things that we were taught as children? How could we forget the things that we were taught in school? How could we forget those things? Because that's just the way our mind works. Our mind is very present. We stay a lot of times in the present. Oftentimes we'll spend way too much time in the future. But it's easy to forget. It is easy for us to forget. And so we get to this passage in Deuteronomy chapter 4. And Moses is saying some incredibly important things. And in the whole context of chapter 4, he goes through this, he uses these phrases over and over again. So I'm going to read for you just verse 9 out of Deuteronomy chapter 4. It says, "Only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and to your children's children." Now, it seems like sort of a simple idea, but in chapter 4, Moses says something like this at least 3 times. He goes through again and again, and he says, I want you to remember. Take care to remember. Make sure you do not forget. The word that is translated as take care, it really means to guard. It really means like, I'm giving you something valuable, and I want you to take guard. I want you to almost like as if you're standing in front of it. And if somebody tries to get close to that, I want you to sort of put up a defense to make sure that they don't take it from you. That it is something that is so important, is so valuable, that you want to make sure that you are guarding over it. There's 2 Hebrew words that sort of overlap, and they keep coming up in this chapter. There's one word called hisomer and another word called usamer, and they both mean to take heed or to take guard. And it's almost like a song. It just keeps repeating itself over and over and over again throughout this chapter. And if you can remember, you've probably had times when you had your parents or teachers where they would say to you over and over and over again, hey, I know I've told you 100 times, but this is one more time. I need to remind you of this. Make sure that you don't forget. And the times that you have forgotten, one of the things that sort of is sort of dumbfounding to us is that we have things that happen each and every week. And you think, how does that stuff slip our mind? It has been more than once that I have woken up in the middle of the night on a Thursday night, actually early Friday morning. Our trash comes on Friday morning. And around 4:30 in the morning, over and over again, I'll wake up on that Friday and go, oh my goodness, I forgot to take out the garbage. And you think, how hard is that to remember? It is a weekly thing. It's going to come each and every week. And it's really because this is sort of the way that our mind works. And Moses knows this. And even with all the things that the Israelites had seen, they had seen all of those plagues happen. They walked through the splitting, the parting of the Red Sea. They saw this pillar of fire by night and this cloud of smoke by day that literally led them. They watched all of the plagues and all of the things that happened to Pharaoh as Pharaoh continued to harden his heart. You think, how in the world could they forget? But Moses knows what is true about all of us. That if you don't remind yourself, if you don't continually come back to this stuff, that you're going to forget. In Proverbs chapter 4, Solomon takes a very similar tack on this. And he says, he's sort of giving sort of this wisdom as a father to his son. And he says, my son, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart. For they are life to those who find them, and healing to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you crooked speech, and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly toward, and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet, that all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. So he's sort of repeating himself a number of times, but he's making sure it is not just something, hey, just write this down, and if you happen to remember it, it's going to be good, and if you forget it. No, he's saying, this is important. This is important. I do not want you to forget this. And what both of them are sort of pointing to, what Moses is trying to get to, and also what Solomon is trying to say, there's an important principle behind this. There is a consequence if you forget. There is a consequence if you forget these things. And Solomon says, he's really saying, I want you to keep your heart, or guard your heart. Guard your heart with all vigilance. Why? Why should I guard my heart? He says, because from it flows the spring of life. The picture he's saying is, it's your heart. If you don't guard your heart, if you don't guard the things that we've been trying to say to you, the whole essence, the whole base of your being, you're going to do damage to that. If you forget all of the things that God has done for you, it is very quickly for you to fall back into a place of hopelessness. It is very easy for us to fall back into a place of disbelief or to have a weakened faith. If we forget what God did for us last month, if we forget what God did for us last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, then it attacks our very being. That we are made to remember all the things that God has done. And our faith grows when we can recall all the times that God has come through for us. So if you're in a situation where you're not sure what tomorrow is going to bring, you're not sure what all that's going to happen, it's kind of simple. Is that, I'm worried. I'm worried about paying my bills. I'm worried about my finances. The first thing that I would try to do at that point is say, do you remember a time when God came through for you? Oh, yeah, plenty of times. There was this time I wasn't sure how it was all going to show up, and all of a sudden there's this check that shows up, or someone gave us some money, it was the right amount. And I've heard dozens of those stories. I've heard all kinds of testimonies where people they were just short on this amount, and then all of a sudden this unknown refund or this unknown person comes by and gives them a story. You've heard those things yourself. Now, if we don't remember those things, when we're faced with those things in the present, we very quickly can shrink back. We very quickly can sort of fall into a place where we're not sure that God is going to come through. And that's why Moses and that's why Solomon want to make sure, listen, do not forget this. I'm going to say it to you over and over and over again. Don't forget. Don't go to the left. Don't go to the right. Don't forget what God has done for you. It's an incredibly important thing for us to remember. And make sure, and what Moses is also pointing to, what Solomon points to, is a very important thing. One of the things that helps us to remember is to talk about them. Both of them sort of have this sort of idea of like, listen, I want you to not only remember this stuff, but I want you to tell it. I want you to tell it to your children. I want you to tell it to your children's children. And in Solomon, when he's talking in Proverbs chapter 4, he says, I just want you to keep thinking about this. I want you to keep saying it, repeating it. Don't forget it. Because it's in telling. If you have people around you and you get into a situation like, let me tell you what God did for me. And for anybody, it's sort of if they think this is the only season by which we can grade things, if this is the only season and nothing's working out in 2020, it's all sort of falling apart. It's very easy for us to sort of find, like, this is it, this is the worst. For people to go back and say, no, I remember the housing crisis of 2007 and 2008. I remember how God worked in that situation. I remember what our nation was like when we were going through the recent wars in the Middle East. I remember when we were going through situations in the 80s and the late 70s and how those financial crises were all over the place. And for many of us, we can sort of say, hey, look, we saw that happen. We saw our way through that. But especially on a faith journey, if you can sort of remember, I remember there was a season when God spoke to me very clearly. I remember a season when God gave me some guidance, when God gave me some hope, when God gave me a reminder of what he had done for me in sending his son. If you are in a season where you think this right now is all there is, this right now is the worst that it could possibly be, there's nothing that can change that. My encouragement to you is no. Remember. Moses wants you to remember. Solomon wants you to remember. Don't forget. It's interesting in the last few moments that Jesus has with his disciples. He uses this word. When he's talking through the Last Supper, the disciples didn't even know it was the Last Supper, but he says, I want you to do this and we know the sort of the King James Version, the Old English Version, do this in remembrance of me. But he's calling them, every time you do this, every time you go through this action, every time you break this bread, every time you drink this cup, I want you to remember. I want you to remember the things that I told you. I want you to remember the things that we did. I want you to remember the calling that is on your life. You think, how in the world could any of the disciples forget walking with Jesus? Jesus understands it just the same as Solomon understands it, just the same as Moses understands it. That we need to be reminded. And maybe you're in a season where you need to be reminded. This is your reminder. And maybe you have a lesson that you thought you knew really well and it's been forgotten. That you thought you knew how to do this stuff, but you've forgotten how to do it. That you remember, I think I can remember what God did for me. I would say, is this season that's incredibly important. Remember all the things that God has done for us. Let's pray. God, we thank you. We apologize for the times that we forget. It is very easy for us to not remember what you did for us a month ago, what you did for us a few years ago. Sometimes it's easy for us to forget what you did for us just a few days ago. That you have shown us grace, that you have shown us mercy, that you have forgiven us, that you have invited us into a larger story where we can follow you as your disciple. God, I pray that you would remind us constantly of your presence, that you would remind us constantly of the power of the gospel, and that you would remind us of who we are in you. That there is no season, there is no time, there is no year that reigns over us, that you are in charge. God, we thank you for this series that we're bringing to a close. We are so excited about next week. We are so excited about this special day and this special season. We're excited. We hope this propels us into the fall with great speed and urgency. But even as we do that, we cannot forget all the things that you've done for us. And may we remember and guard them with all diligence. And all this we pray in your name. Amen.
Hey everybody, my name is Daniel Fusco. I'm lead pastor of Crossroads Community Church in Vancouver, Washington. We all want the folks who believe in Jesus to share the good news, but a lot of times people feel nervous, they don't feel equipped. So what we found was that the Back to Church Sunday framework was really easy for people, because I would go up and say, hey, listen, you all have family members and neighbors, you have coworkers and people that you meet at the grocery store who you don't know where they're at spiritually, but you can simply say, hey, listen, it's Back to Church Sunday coming up in 2 weeks, in a week at our church. Will you come and join me? And what we found is that our folks just loved how simple it was. They're simply saying, hey, listen, will you come and join me? I'm going to be at this service. And it was so beautiful to watch the Crossroads family jump on in, wanting to see people come back and re-engage in the things of God. And it was so easy and effortless because it was pre-packaged, and people were excited because they were stepping into the things that they were wanting to do, but maybe they were a little bit scared to do. So we jumped in with both feet. Social media, we did a bunch of mailings, and we saw tremendous fruit. Let me tell you a story. One lady, she was probably in about her late 70s or early 80s. She was invited by a woman who goes to Crossroads to come to Back to Church Sunday. Sure enough, she comes with her friend. She gives her life to Jesus at the service. 2 weeks later, she comes forward with her daughter and her granddaughter, all of them giving their lives to Jesus, all because of someone got invited to Back to Church Sunday. People are hungry for Jesus. And we need to sometimes as churches remember that we need to give them reasons to come back to church.
Inviting a family member, coworker, or friend to Back to Church Sunday could be a defining moment for them. It's an opportunity to change a life of someone you care about. In a recent survey, 82% of people said they would attend a church if invited. Yet only 2% of us ever invite someone. One thing we're sure of in the wake of the COVID pandemic and quarantine is we're stronger together. We need each other's support and friendship. And this year, more than ever before, Back to Church Sunday is more than just a day. It's what we all need. Connection with each other. That's what makes us stronger. Who will you invite to Back to Church Sunday?
Another thing we do want to put on your calendar, we are already looking forward to a few things in October. And one of those things that's going to happen in October, or actually one of the first things that's going to happen in October, is on Sweetest Day. And that is Saturday, October 17th. And what we are putting together here at the church is something very exciting. We have partnered with Scratch, which is a restaurant here in Louisville. And what we're wanting to do is we're going to put on a date night here at the church, actually right here in this room, right here in the fellowship hall. And we're looking to have an opportunity for you to come, you and your loved one, to have a night out. So whether you are a newlywed or whether you're celebrating your 50th anniversary or anywhere in between, we want you to be able to come and enjoy a wonderful meal at the church, and a program designed about bringing and drawing your relationships closer, making them more fun and more meaningful. And you have to go out on Sweetest Day anyways, and so we're going to provide that vehicle for you. We're going to have free childcare that evening. Kid Watch is going to help us put together a childcare program for that, and so we're looking forward to just having this room full of couples celebrating that. And of course, as we get closer to Halloween, we're going to have a trunk or treat on Halloween Day. So it's going to be on October 31st, Saturday. The city traditionally trick-or-treats from 3 to 5, and so we're going to have our trunk or treat. And if you've come to it for the last few years, you know it's a big to-do. This year it's just going to be amazing. Just some of the vehicles we have planned and just some of the surprises they're going to go into this. We're really, really looking forward to it. So keep a couple of those things in mind as we go through this season, beginning the fall and into